Watch it not start.
Yeah. Ooh!
Isn't that something?
It actually started.
Starts beautifully too.
Here it is, not only one of the worst cars I have ever driven, but quite possibly one of the rarest. 1989 Sterling 827 SLI. The weird car unicorn of all weird car unicorns. Also, this inadvertently became the summer of Wookie looks at British cars and the British car industry, so yeah, here's part 2 of 3 of those. When I was in middle school, on almost a weekly basis, I used to visit a chain of bookstores in Maine called Mr. Paperback. I would peruse the car magazines like clockwork, and I'd always check on the automotive section of books to see if there was anything new that would jump out for me. One of those books was a little coffee table book by Richard Porter called Crap Cars, and it would help form my eclectic tasting cars. A few cars in that book really stood out to me, namely the failed European entries in the American market of the 1980s. Cars like this fascinated me as a young teen, and it continued to this day. Heck, I bought a car from a brand featured in this book, a Merkur, when I first moved to North Carolina because I thought it was a cool and forgotten piece of automotive history. Unfortunately, I was straight out of college and was pretty broke and had no time to sink into it, so I held onto it for way too long before offloading it to a kid out of Richmond, Virginia. Another one of those cars was the Sterling 827 or 825, known better outside of America as the Rover 827. I touched briefly upon the struggles of Rover in my last episode, but the story of Rover in this car is simply wild. British Leyland were going through the troubles, as they had expanded to the point where the whole company was unmanageable with constant bickering and competition between brands, constant strikes that plagued the company since the early 70s, and a rapidly growing reputation for horrific build quality that was sending the British buyers to German and Japanese brands. If you thought the American auto industry was bad during this time, boy oh boy, the Brits were beating us in gross incompetence in almost every aspect. So BL had partnered with Honda previously on a small car, the Triumph Acclaim, which took one of Honda's designs, the Blade, that's Blade, and applied the British touch to the car while manufacturing it in Cali. Compared to the cars it replaced, the Triumph Dolomite, the Austin Allegro, and Austin Maxi, it was a modern car that didn't fall apart when you looked at it. As a result, it was a smashing success for the company, and a second generation would be soon green-lit, although that model would be sold as a Rover due to BL streamlining their bloated lineup. BL and Honda looked at the midsize market next, but decided it was not needed due to the Austin Maestro and the Austin Montego already being deep into development. So, they settled on the executive car segment, which would greatly benefit both companies. Rover needed a replacement for the aging SD1. While a wonderfully modern car compared to the rest of the BL lineup, it had been in production since 1976 and was rapidly falling behind newer and better German counterparts. Honda needed a true range topper to sit above its Accord family car. They needed a full-size luxury car to truly make the next step in the American market. The partnership seemed like the best of both worlds: British style and Japanese build quality and reliability. While Honda's off-road would be built in Saitama, Japan, Rover's would be built in Cali, England. The result would be Honda's Legend, which would debut the Acura luxury brand in the States, and Rover's 800 series, which was not only hopeful to turn around Rover's fortune back home, but reintroduce the brand in the United States. Now, did they sell it as a Rover in the States? No. For some reason, they decided Rover didn't sound distinguished and British enough, so they went balls deep into the so British with the marketing. During this time in the 1980s, every European brand was trying to break into the States, considering the long-standing success of Mercedes, BMW, and Volkswagen Audi. So it was only natural that Rover would want to get on this lucrative market, but with a different name. While the Acura and the Sterling both shared a common chassis and drivetrain, they were markedly different cars. Both had unique bodies and interiors, on top of using different electronics and just about everything else. More about that later. Both cars were released to critical acclaim. The Legend was a sales success, making Car and Driver's 10 Best list for 3 years in a row, on top of winning Motor Trend's Import Car of the Year in 1987. The Sterling, first sold as the 825, also sold to initial good sales in the United States, with people praising the so British interior, the elegantly modern exterior, and the sportier suspension compared to the floaty Legend. Even as clapped out as it is, the 827 I'm driving today features a remarkably tight steering, despite the overboosted power steering at parking lot speeds, and the suspension hugs the corners with ease. The Honda C-Series V6 under the hood is a remarkably smooth engine, and the 5-speed transmission is typical Honda stick-shift goodness. Just in overall driving impressions, this is a good car. It's just a shame that it's a Sterling. This car is absolutely crumbling away around the drivetrain. And that was an issue from the factory. The real wood paneling inside, while it looks great, was known for falling off almost immediately leaving the factory. Corrosion was a huge issue from the start. But the real kicker was the Lucas electronics, the bane of every British car of the 70s and 80s. These cars were notorious in their day for being some of the most unreliable cars on sale, let alone 32 years into the future. As a result, sales immediately tanked, and despite the 1989 refresh that saw the introduction of the updated C27A V6, which explains the car's change to the 827 nomenclature, the writing was on the wall for Rover in the States, in the Sterling nameplate. In total, if Wikipedia is to be trusted, some 35,739 Sterlings were sold in the United States before the company went belly up in 1991. It was also right before another complete mid-cycle refresh known as the R17 that saw the introduction of Rover's new waterfall grille. But the damage was long done, and even the updated models would still suffer interior rattles and electronic gremlins back home in England. As mentioned before in the previous episode, BMW would buy Rover in 1994, but they only really wanted Land Rover and Mini in the deal, similar to how Chrysler only really wanted Jeep in their buyout of AMC. Despite the launch of the 800 series' replacement with the 75 in 1998, which was really a replacement for the smaller 600, but Rover wouldn't replace the 800 at the top of the heap, Rover was rapidly losing market share, and it was sold off to Phoenix Consortium in 2000, while Land Rover was sold off to Ford. Rover soldiered on, now partnered with the return of the MG brand, but it all blew up in the failed sale to SAIC in 2005. Nanjing Automobile would buy the remains, but would lose the rights to the famed Rover name to Ford, who never really did anything with it. In 2006, SAIC would launch a new brand called Rover, which was a Chinese transliteration of Rover, and SAIC would merge with Nanjing in 2007, before launching the Rover 750, which on turn is based on a lengthened 75 platform. Yeah, that's an old car. The Rover name is currently owned by Tata, but Jaguar is quietly serving as the Rover to Land Rover in modern times. So, the Rover name is dead after a long, slow death. Anyways, after that big, long, tumultuous story, this particular car has one just as crazy as its namesake. In middle school, the current owner, Jack, first saw this car while riding to school with his mom. This weird, wedge-shaped 80s car infatuated him, and he made his mom look up what the heck a Sterling 827 on her iPhone 1 in the car. For several years, he saw the original owner, a man Jack describes as looking like the real-life Doc Brown, putting around Cary, North Carolina, often with a small homemade trailer with no lights or tags behind it. Until one day, he didn't see it and he feared it finally faced the crusher. A little later, one night, perusing Craigslist, he saw this silver and racing striped Sterling for $1,200. Of course, being a very similar car to the one on the streets of his childhood, he had to look at it. He was in for a shock when he opened the hood and saw the original green paint. This was Doc Brown's Sterling after all. Turns out the second owner, Corey, was looking for a British car to take to the Florida Man Lemons rally, hoping to find an old Jag for some British points for that race. Lo and behold, he found this 827 on Copart. Turns out, Doc Brown was in a minor rear-ender accident, but due to there being 0 parts available for this car, the poor Sterling was totaled. Corey bought it for $450, painted it silver, added some stripes to evoke a Sterling Moss Jag, and proceeded to drive the thing all the way to Key West and back. Somehow, against all odds, yeah, simply amazing this car made it. Of course, he won organizer's choice that race. Knowing this car was the one from his childhood, of course Jack bought it. Of course, it's a straight up electrical nightmare, and he's only recently gotten it on the road after the year that shall not be named. Turns out, he only needed a battery to start it right up. Now, the list of what works is much shorter than what doesn't. Engine and transmission work flawlessly. Of course, they're Honda products. And the period aftermarket radio. Corey at least wanted a tape deck that would work on his trip to Key West. But yeah, this car has all the issues in the world. Of course, the headlights don't work, and the taillights stay on all the time. Now to stop this, he has to unhook the battery, which wouldn't be much of an issue if the hood latch didn't work when it simply wanted to. The interior is simply crumbling away, and other than the heat, none of the HVAC works. And of course, you only get just a little bit of heat from the vents because of course the blower motor has quit. The powered driver's seat does work, but the kind of confusing button layout have to be pushed a certain way or all the electronics quit and the car shuts off. Yay, Lucas Electronics. It's simply a miracle this car is still on the road. It supposedly has 249,000 miles. But the odometers on these cars are known for not being accurate at all, so we know that number might be greatly exaggerated. But the fact that Doc Brown kept this thing on the road for almost 30 years despite it just crumbling away around him like my life is simply amazing. When Corey bought this car from Copart, there were these cassettes in the center console, and it still had the original dealer brochures and the owner's manual in excellent condition. So while this car is a jalopy, it's like a snapshot in time. These cars were unreliable nightmares when new, and age has not been kind to them. Out of the 35,000 that were sold, supposedly only 184 are currently registered and on the road today in the United States. And yeah, this is a manual hatchback, one of only 3% that was sold in America, so this is even rarer than your normal Sterling. This car is truly a craptastic unicorn. A crappy, Thatcher-era, British-built, British Leyland unicorn. Jack does intend to slowly restore Doc Brown's Sterling. The spray bomb paint is flaking off, and he's fairly certain he'll just pressure wash off. So, that's his next step. Anyways, this episode has gone way too long. I would personally like to thank Jack for not only living out his weird car childhood fantasy by owning this standout car from his hometown, but letting me experience a car that's captivated me since reading about its failure in crap cars in like 2005. I am the Wookie, and I love crappy automotive failures like the 1989 Sterling 827 SLI. Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and I really hope you enjoyed this week's video. Thank you once again for watching another episode of Wookie Drives. Once again, huge thanks to Jack for letting me experience a Sterling. Yeah, this is just an amazingly bad, rare car, especially in the United States. Be sure to check out his Twitter for more weird car rants, raves, and sterlings. If you have a car or truck or a crappy weird car like this that you'd love to have on the show and happen to be in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, feel free to email me at wookiedrives@gmail.com. That is wookiedrives@gmail.com. Check out my Facebook for channel updates, my Twitter and Instagram for more Wookie rants, raves, and shenanigans. And yeah, like, share, subscribe. Every little interaction helps my little channel grow. And finally, thank you so much for watching, and have a good day.
The dream, to unite the forefront of automotive technology with the heritage of elegant British coachwork. Introducing Sterling, the advancement of the European luxury road car. Connolly leather and burled walnut set the Sterling standard of comfort, while advanced Japanese engineering delivers reliability and exhilarating performance. Sterling, the dream is born.
Test drive the new Sterling at your authorized Sterling dealer.